So we see that some people respond to triggers in different ways. Like they used to have the fight or flight syndrome. Now they've added
Yes.
a few more, like
Uh-huh.
freeze. Or do you want to describe different ways in which we might experience
Yeah, absolutely.
triggers?
Uh-huh. So as you mentioned, the fight or flight are ones that a lot of people are familiar with already. So we got fight, we got flight, we got freeze. We also have shut down or submit.
So
And
what's
we
the difference between freeze and shut down and submit?
Well, freeze is when our, to use a bit of technical language here, is when our sympathetic nervous system
Mm-hmm.
is activated. So that's the area in our bodies where our body is sensing some sort of danger or threat,
Mm-hmm.
and it mobilizes in some way. Like for example, if somebody starts chasing me with a weapon, I'm going to run.
Right.
I'm not necessarily thinking, should I go and chant my japa right now? Or should I go and, get something to eat? Or should I run? No, my body
Yeah.
is activated and I'm going, and I'm going to think about all that other stuff later.
Right.
So when we're in that state of freeze, that's where it is. Fight, flight, and freeze all fall under this place of sympathetic nervous system activation, when we're in that highly activated place and our body or our nervous system is essentially reacting for us in that mobilized, energized way. And so freeze specifically is a response that we see in a lot of assault type situations.
Okay. Because
When
you just
we,
know you can't fight them and you can't run fast enough.
yes, yeah, when we know, if I try and fight the person who's assaulting me, they could hurt me even more. And, maybe I'm not going to be able to get away if I try and run. So that freeze is kind of a way of just surviving in the moment. And it's not comfortable to be in that situation, but that's often how people get through. Whereas shut down is the opposite. So freeze is we're feeling everything very intensely, even though we feel stuck. And
Okay.
shut down is more when I disconnect from emotion because it's all just too painful. Rather than feeling the overwhelm of the freeze and that activation, if I recognize that there's absolutely no way I can get out of this, and this is more common for people who experience repeated trauma, especially in those developmental childhood years, they shut down instead.
Then they
Rather,
don't feel anything.
yes, they don't feel anything, and that's a lot easier than having to feel all the physical or emotional pain of what they're going through in their trauma.
So is shut down an anatomic response, or is it kind of like learned because you weren't able to do anything?
It's both. So when we go into that place of shutdown, another part of the nervous system called the dorsal vagal system
Mm-hmm.
kicks in. This is the response. This is kind of the opposite of the sympathetic nervous system. And so when we're in that dorsal vagal place, it's sort of this place of collapse. When people are down there, it's usually a lot of heaviness in their body, a lot of tiredness, pretty much not caring about everything, feeling a sense of indifference and lack of motivation, and just overall disconnect. And so by being in that place of disconnect, it's our nervous system's way of protecting ourselves from the overwhelm of any kind of traumatic situation, particularly those ongoing ones.
So if that's repeated, would that be labeled as depression?
Depression definitely lives in that dorsal vagal place.
Mm-hmm.
And so the antidote for people who get stuck in that dorsal vagal place, particularly, when the trauma is over, but their nervous system continues to react in that way,
Mm-hmm.
is reacquainting to the body, but in an energizing way. So doctors often tell us, the best thing you can do for depression is exercise. And
Okay.
it's kind of ironic because that's the thing people least want to do
Right.
when they're depressed, when they're feeling that heavy, collapsed feeling. Of course, they're not going to want to move. But actually, that's the best thing we can do if that's how we're experiencing our trigger.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So you've already explained to us that there's fight, flight, freeze, shut down. Is there any other ones?
There's also attach. So for some people, they might, want to just grab somebody who they're really close to in order to try and seek some sort of safety, because perhaps that's worked for them in the past. Perhaps they have some sort of internal attachment need that hasn't been resolved, like abandonment issues, all these types of things. So their go-to in a situation of threat is to try and attach to somebody.
So if we were just having like a normal husband-wife spat, and somebody's triggered and the other person just doesn't want to let them go, is that what's kicking in?
It can be, for sure. Yeah. It depends on the exact reaction. Sometimes it can be this sense of fight. I need to resolve this and I need to be right, and don't you dare walk away from me because we have to get through this right now. Or yes, it can 100% be that person reaching out and trying to attach because it feels like a life or death situation. Yeah. I also find the flight part quite interesting too. I always like to spend a little bit of time talking about this, because when most people think of flight, they just think of running away, and that certainly is one part of it. But there's so much more to the flight part. People who take substances, for example, that's a way of their flight part activating, using substances to try and escape from some sort of overwhelming pain, or using, compulsive shopping or video gaming or even risky sexual behaviors. These can all fall under that flight category. Even sometimes suicide to some extent, this idea of wanting to run away. Yeah.
So how do we respond in a more proactive way that serves our needs better?
Yeah. So I probably sound like a bit of a broken record here, but I'll go back to this piece of mindful awareness. So first of all, I'm going to ahead of time recognize which parts or which survival strategies I'm inclined towards. If I know about myself that I'm somebody who gets stuck in that flight response, I'm going to be like, okay, how do I know I'm in my flight response right now? What tells me that in my body? And so for me, maybe it's that, I don't know, like I'll use the same example, that my heart is beating really fast, or that my palms are really jittery, or my hands are jittery. And so I'm going to use those physical sensations as indicators that, okay, my flight part or my flight response is online. So I'm going to do something about it. First of all, again, I'm going to do some of that physical grounding or emotional regulation using my body. And then once I've effectively calmed myself down physiologically, then I can address some of the thoughts that come with that. So I might say to my flight part, hey, I see you there. I see what you're trying to do inside of me. And thanks for that. I appreciate your intention of trying to keep me safe, because I know you've done that in the past. But right now, I don't need you to be at the forefront. And so thanks anyway, but I've got this right now. We're safe inside.
And then we can choose to respond in a suitable way in that situation.
Yeah, exactly. It gives us that space to choose, which is why starting with the body is always a really important part, because until we physically calm ourselves down, we're not going to have much space to choose anything logical at all.
Right. So that's a really great tip, because whether we've been abused or not abused, we all get triggered in so many ways.
For sure.
Unfulfilled expectations, or being grumpy, or being hungry, or so many things. So, it's a standard marital counseling advice to tell people to take that pause.
Yes.
It's been really helpful, though, what to do in that pause. How you're sharing with us that instead of just going blank and maybe freaking out more in the pause, to actually take a look at our body, something to focus on to get us started in how to utilize that pause for a higher purpose.
For sure. And it's a big paradigm shift for a lot of people to do that, because our initial reaction when we take that pause is to get immersed in our thoughts of how we're thinking, oh, I'm right, and I'm going to prove, and I'm going to tell them this, and I'm going to win.
Then we're still triggered.
And we're still triggered, yeah. So by starting with the body, it allows us to come from that more grounded place, even though it's very difficult to let the thoughts go in that moment. It does help us in the long run to come to that place of connection, which is what couples are trying to do at the end of the day.
Right. And that starts with being aware of what our triggers are, what our body's trying to tell us, and really wanting to respond in a better way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And again, being kind to ourselves in those moments, rather than judging myself like, oh my gosh, I got triggered again. What's wrong with me? To take that pause and say, no, actually this is okay. This is that traumatized part in me coming up, and this is the way that it knows how to respond. And I'm going to
I push the rewind button, and can we try that again?
Yeah. If only, right?
We had one couple that we counseled in premarital counseling. We told them, you're going to blow it sometimes, so you can just like push the rewind button and say, hey, can I do that again in a better way? Yeah. So I saw him about a year into marriage. He says, I use that rewind button an awful lot. I love it.
Amazing. I love it.
It's okay. Yeah.
It's perfectly okay.
Yeah. So that was such helpful advice, how to get out of that triggered state, because it's a conditioning. Yeah. And, as spirit souls, we want to not stay stuck in our conditioning, but to respond from our higher true selves, so we can come, from the mode of ignorance and passion to the mode of goodness, and to the mode of Shuddha-sattva, where we're actually responding in the best interest of ourselves and everyone else for, progressing in our spiritual journey. So thank you so much, Krishna-Prana, for giving us that valuable advice and practical tips how to actually do it. Mm-hmm. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Krishna.
Hare Krishna.